every product communicates a message through 3 lenses. This is what my product is. This is what my product can do for you. And when you use it, this is what it ultimately means. And means are outcomes. And salespeople are often really, really, really good at saying what something is. They can oftentimes do a pretty decent job of talking about what it's going to do. They often suck at communicating what it means to the person who bought it. They're what's in it for me. So one of the things I do to help organizations kind of, really net out their messaging is I get them to simplify with me on, what is it? What is the thing? And if you can't describe it in 1 line what your thing is, in 1 to 2 lines what it does, and then focus on some metric-based hard data outcomes that means, you haven't told or figured out your story yet.
David Weiss, good to see you today.
What is up, Dan?
How you doing?
Good, man. How are you?
I'm doing great. So I was looking back at when we met, which is only a few months ago, and it was a series of LinkedIn posts that you made. One in particular caught my mind. I'm going to read a little bit of it, and then I'd love for you to comment on it because it really got me amped. And at the time, you were looking for an LMS software. And what you posted was that you're in the market for an LMS software, and the process of one of the vendors that you were evaluating, number one, started with an online questionnaire, followed by the SDR who wanted to do a discovery, which was the questionnaire. Then the AE got involved to do their discovery. Then you were told that you'd get a tailored demo, which was nothing more than another account executive doing a discovery and who did the demo.
Yep.
And you said, can I just get a darn SE on the call right now quickly and get this thing done so I can understand whether or not you can deliver? And then ultimately they told you, yeah, we don't think that we can do what you're asking us to do, and wasted a whole shitload of your time.
Yep.
What the heck happened there?
So you covered it well. Here's the twist that nobody knows right now.
Yeah.
I'm about to buy from that company. Ha! So here's the twist. So I was in the process of evaluating 17 LMS and enablement providers. I did what most normal, rational people do, is they did a demo request. What I did that most people don't do is I actually was very thoughtful about what I wanted in a solution before I reached out to vendors. So I had multiple internal meetings with my team. We deeply thought about the use case, the how behind it. We wrote out our own decision criteria. We mapped that to an Excel spreadsheet. And during my demo request for all of these vendors, I gave it to them. And I said, full transparency, this is what I need. Tell me if you can do it or not. And if you can do all of it, then I'll have a conversation with you. All 17 vendors said they could do it, which scared the crap out of me because I'm like, you guys don't know how to read, because I know there's some things in here that should knock you out. This company was one of them. They didn't even read the form. They did the whole here's BANT. Now here's a form of BANT. Now let's get on a call and re-BANT. And then, the guy who's actually worked at the same company I did as a salesperson when I was a VP of enterprise sales, started building what I would consider very fake relationship and rapport. And then when it came down to this individual needing to do the demo and hold their end of the bargain and didn't, I kind of got a little frustrated because I just went through it over and over and over again. And again, I'm doing this with 17 other companies. So I don't exactly have time for salespeople to lie to me. So I took what you said and some of the things I just shared, and I packaged it up and I sent it to their CEO. And I said, I'm doing this because you are a company that provides software to train people how to sell, and this is the experience of buying from you. And the response I got from that was actually really encouraging. It was, we're sorry, this is the wrong experience. I went back and listened to the calls. These things shouldn't have happened. And then this CEO got me with their head of sales, got me with their head of enablement, got me with their senior SE leader, and they restarted. And I gave them one chance to restart. and they knocked it out of the park. And I've since, been engaged with them for about a month and a half, like in a legit evaluation, and they don't know it yet. And by the time this goes live, they'll find out. I've already picked them, and I'm negotiating the contract right now. So it's amazing the difference between a good sales process and one that isn't, because the one that wasn't almost got this company knocked out, and they're actually the vendor I'm going to end up partnering with. So yeah, that's the story.
Love it. Love the story. If you wouldn't mind, can you share with me what you do? I know what you do, but I'd love my audience to learn more about what you do.
Yeah. So what does David do? David does a lot. So the day job is I am a chief revenue officer for a company called the Sales Collective. So we're, I consider us somewhat unique in the market where we use data to help you hire people, then data to help you train them, then data to help you build process. And then the thought is, if we do our jobs right, we help you create a flywheel of sustainable growth where we help you hire more people, train them, and execute the process effectively. So that's the day job. Been doing that for a couple of years now. Company has doubled in size every year. We're doing some really cool stuff that's very unique in the market because, again, we're using data to make all these decisions and to help build all these strategies as opposed to just throwing things against the wall and hope they stick. I'm a very scientific, data-driven guy. When it comes to my side hustle, I build custom medic frameworks and trainings for folks. So I'm a geek when it comes to medic. I believe it's a deal management philosophy, not a qualification framework. I could go super deep on all the things that people get wrong when it comes to medic, but suffice to say, that's what I do on the side. And then I'm also a dad, husband, full-time of all of those things, living here in Houston, Texas. So, yeah, that's me.
That's awesome. Thanks. Appreciate the overview.
Yeah, man.
So this podcast series is called How to Unfuck Your Startup. And I've spent many years unfucking startups. I come in and what they tell you you need to do and what you learn you really need to do are usually two completely different things. And I'm just curious, you've probably seen your fair share of fucked up startups. Can you offer up an example? You don't need to use specific names, but like what's the most messed up situation you've seen? And again, don't necessarily use details that probably shouldn't be used.
Yeah, no, I mean, I've worked for all different types of companies. So, I started my career in Fortune 500 organizations. Then I said, I'm going to bring that knowledge to startups. And, like as an example, I was number 2 employee with this small company called Outreach that eventually went to be valued at close to $4 billion. I was the number 2 employee on the East Coast for them. I helped them stand up that East Coast sales motion. Went on to a company called Seismic, where they're one of the top enablement platforms on the market, if not considered one of the number one. Then went into smaller bootstrapped companies, and what I'll say is like the most fucked up was the earliest possible stage, which was a seed round. That was one of those situations that I think is a classic example of what not to do. They had one salesperson before I got there that wasn't hitting goals. They said, we're going to hire David so you can get that person hit goals, and then we want you to hire 3 more people and build the process, hire the people, train them, and scale this because we know we've got the right product. We just don't have a good salesperson, so we need you to fix that and then hire a bunch more. So I said, okay. And I signed up to do that. And the mistake I made right there as the inaugural sales leader in that startup is I believed the founder that they had a good product. And they showed me the product, but and it looked all right. But it was a space that I hadn't sold into. So I really wasn't as informed about the market and about the product as I would have liked to be. And I still, I placed a bet. And it was the wrong bet because once I got there, I hired the people, built the process, realized that salesperson wasn't that bad. And we set up 130 meetings in 30 days. And we went on all of them across 45 days. And we sold nothing. And we realized, because we kept hearing the same feedback, oh, can it do this? No. Hey, can it do that? No. Well, what about this? Yeah, that's coming. Well, when it can do this, we'd be really interested. Please come back. And so we brought all that feedback to the business, and they were like, yeah, we'll build that. And then they tried to build it, and then they turned over their first IT person, which was a technical co-founder. Then they hired another one that promised to do it and couldn't. And 3 months later, they had me lay one person off, then the next, and then me. So that is one of those classic mistakes where you have idea market fit, not product market fit. And when you grow too fast and try and expect too much, sales leaders, we can scale what works. We can sometimes even roadmap and help future sell a product that's maybe not there yet. But when you don't have product market fit, sales cannot fix that. And that's what I learned.
So I spent a lot of time with validating, especially in an early stage where you may think you've got a great idea, but unless the market is saying they will actually pay you real money for it, you don't have any validation. And I've also seen product teams, dev teams go and build a whole product / company around a solution that has not been validated. Have you any experiences like that? Any stories or examples you could share?
Yeah. So, I think this one is that, like, it was a product that was built. When they hired me, they had about 100 customers on it. And that was one of the things that kind of made me feel comfortable. But what I found out, it was 100 friends, family, sold over years. And it was single users. And then when I dug into the data even more, and this was my mistake. These are things I've learned that I no longer, I would dig in deeper. This was me being excited as my first head of sales role. But when I started digging into adoption rates and you've got 100 users, how many of them log in every day? 5? 10? How many log in every quarter? 20? Okay. You have 100 people signed up, but are they, and what terms were they signed up under? Was it freebies and trials and POCs that were never carried through? Once you start actually digging into that data, you can see some really unique info. And I wouldn't have taken the job if I had done that. So I think that one is pretty classic of just anybody listening to this. Don't trust early stage founders. Dig into the data, because they built a product to solve a problem that they had or that they saw. And they built it for them, and they're very close and they're very much in love with it. But just because they've got 10, 20, 50, even 100 users on it doesn't mean it's being adopted. Doesn't mean it's truly getting the outcomes that you originally built the thing for. And that's the part that is a little scary, that I think is a trap a lot of people fall into.
Great advice. Very helpful. So let me switch gears a little bit. I want to talk to you about simplification or overcomplication. So what I see regularly, especially when I'm at a conference and I walk the conference aisles and you're at all the booths, the exhibitors, and they've got their fancy marketing booth up there and they've got the company name. And then underneath that, here's what we do. And half the time I have no freaking idea what they're trying to say. And that's overcomplication. I've also come into companies as CRO where the messaging is overcomplicated and the product is even overcomplicated. You experienced this before, yes? And what are your thoughts on, and what would you tell a founder about the fact that they're overcomplicating everything that they do and say to their customer? So
normally I see it the other way. So I normally see people that don't know the right story to tell. And I can, potentially take us both places, but we'll first address not telling the right story. So many folks tell the story of, these are the features. This is, the things and all the shiny bells and whistles and what the solution does. What they often miss is being able to explain to a third grader what it means to them, outcomes. And I think, why people buy things is to solve a problem and get a result. That's ultimately the reason people buy everything is there's some sort of problem that they're experiencing that they've now deemed a priority, and they're trying to get some result from that. And I find that often in the early days of companies, people really struggle with telling that story. And they may overcomplicate it. We do all these things and we solve all these problems. Or look at all the great features and benefits. But they often struggle to hone in on that like one key core message. And they often struggle backing that up with any sort of, data. And, one of the exercises I take my clients through is called is, does, means. Dan, have you ever been through an is, does, means exercise? Are you familiar with that at all?
Not specifically, but probably a different version of the same thing because I've heard a lot and seen a lot. But
yeah,
hit me up.
So is, does, means. When you're talking about communicating a message, every product communicates a message through those three lenses. This is what my product is. This is what my product can do for you. And when you use it, this is what it ultimately means. And means are outcomes. And salespeople are often really, really, really good at saying what something is. They can oftentimes do a pretty decent job of talking about what it's going to do. They often suck at communicating what it means to the person who bought it. They're what's in it for me. So one of the things I do to help organizations kind of, really net out their messaging is I get them to simplify with me on, what is it? What is the thing? And if what the thing is multiple paragraphs, it's not like, what is this? I'm holding up a phone, folks. This is a smartphone. That's it. That's all it is. That's what it is. What it does is house hundreds and hundreds of apps and what it means to me is it provide all of those apps do all these different things, which can help me be more productive, which can help me, contact folks, stay in communication, solve all these different problems. That's the means is that end thing. And if you can't describe it in one line, what your thing is, in 1 to 2 lines, what it does, and then focus on some metric-based hard data outcomes that means, you haven't told or figured out your story yet. And so that's one of the things I help folks do. I'll just pause there for any thoughts on your side, but we can then talk about means because means is like everything.
Yeah, let's definitely talk about means. My version of that is I tell my teams and my advisory clients, number 1, what problem are you solving? Number 2, obviously tell me more about the problem. Number 2, what is the product and what does it do? Sometimes it's a little bit of how do you solve that problem? But if you get too much into the how, you start getting down to an engineering track. And then the third one was, why does it matter? And I try to personalize the story. And I love that you mentioned a story. So I like to begin my story with, how, when, because you can personalize it. So David, how when you're trying to do X, but you can't, really sucks, right? Yeah, no, I hate that. Yeah, that problem can be really big. Well, we have a solution to that. We solve that problem. And here's why that matters to you. So that's how I typically do the storytelling piece. And I think storytelling is hugely, hugely critical. So now here we are, mid-2024, early to mid-2024. Over the last year or so, the deals that I've been involved with my team have been hugely scrutinized by finance. Finance typically aren't engineering. Finance don't necessarily have that zeros and ones mentality, but they do need to know in order to give you budget or put you back in, give you a renewal, they need to know what the heck your product does. And if you can't explain to a finance person what your product does, you ain't getting that deal. Now, you may be selling to an engineering department or a marketing department, but if you can't turn the language that you speak to those buyers into the language that the finance team speaks, again, you ain't getting that deal or that renewal. Any thoughts on that concept? Are you seeing that in the marketplace, how finance is becoming very much a part of the deals that you sell?
Yeah, and there's a couple of reasons for that, but and finance does care about what you do, but the language of finance is outcomes. The language of finance is means. So, what was the problem, to your point? Where were we before? where are we now? So if we got rid of you, where would we go back to?
Mm-hmm.
And then since we've deployed you, what's happened? And the what's happened is ultimately the means. It's these are the outcomes we've got from the solution and the value of those outcomes. And that's ultimately what finance wants to know, is what were the outcomes we got? And then they're going to balance that off of what they paid for those outcomes. And they're going to do a value analysis and say, do we want to keep paying for those outcomes? And if we do, let's keep going. And if we don't, that's okay too. But that's what they're doing. The rise of finance, Dan, is actually really interesting. I equate the rise of finance for why so many salespeople are struggling right now. Because 2023 Q4 was the worst point in the last 15 to 20 years for private equity and venture capital funding. And when businesses aren't getting external capital, they need to either be profitable or in some ways slow the burn. And to do that, they cut spending. And so why that's so important is I'm a believer that salespeople primarily have been taught to sell into budget-rich environments. And when you're selling into a budget-rich environment, you're selling to often a defined project and inside of a defined budget. And when you do that, your job is to convince people why you're better than the market and to make your solution fit the budget that has been allocated, and maybe justify a little bit more. When you're selling in a no budget, undefined budget world, the language that you need to speak in is in the creation of need through the solving of unique problems, and then in the financial engineering of building business cases. And I genuinely believe most salespeople never learned how to financially engineer deals. And because of that lack of knowledge, they are unsuccessful in selling in this environment. The best salespeople, I don't think, are struggling more now than they necessarily have in the past, because they were always doing that. But folks that never learned how to do that are struggling because finance is now involved in the deal, because budget has been cut, because private equity money has been cut. And so now they need to figure out how to create budget inside of every deal. So I think that's why the rise of finance. I think that's one of the reasons why so many salespeople are struggling, because of that.
Yeah, I think that the skills that you had years ago when the market wasn't so strong were invaluable. And now here we are back having in a tough market environment. And without those skills, and many sales reps who have begun their careers in the last 4 to 5 years are now finding themselves lacking those skills. And there's quite a bit of opportunity out there, perhaps in your practice, helping train these sellers so they can understand outcomes and solutions. And that's critical. That's real critical. Let's go back to your is, does, means. I'd love to understand your thoughts on how a leader can organize their team so they can host that kind of a workshop or training effort.
Yeah. So, and when you say organize their team, just setting a meeting to talk about the thing, or what do you mean?
So if I'm leading a sales team and I want to train my sellers, especially my sellers that have only been in the market maybe 3, 4, 5 years and don't have the skills from a down market like you need today, right? How would I train them? What kind of a program would you put together that would help these reps learn how to sell in a tough environment?
Yeah, I mean, one of the best things you could do that I've had clients of mine do is bring in their customers and have their customers tell the story of why'd you buy, why do you stay, and what outcomes have you gotten. And that to me is one of the most valuable things so ADP used to do that a lot. ADP would bring in their customers and have them tell that story. And when your sales folks can start telling the story of your customer through the lens of why they bought, why they stay, and the outcomes they've gotten, your sales folks will ultimately learn how to, as long as the outcomes are designed properly, build business cases, because the business case is all the outcome. The other thing that I've done, and some of the best training I've ever been through, was actually conducted by a CFO. And CareerBuilder used to do this. CareerBuilder had CFOs train their salespeople by teaching them financial engineering. And by financial engineering, I mean, billing terms and contract terms and what those contract terms mean and how to structure deals that optimize cash flow through monthly payments or, upfront versus long term. Really understanding the levers of finance that move the needle. And also how to design like give to get frameworks in negotiation. Those are things, those two right there were some of the best training I've ever been through as a seller to learn how to justify change for my buyer through that lens of all outcomes and means. So those two would be great trainings that are not your typical that you could bring your sales team to, and they'd get a whole heck of a lot out of it.
I can imagine. That's really good. You know what else I think would probably be interesting is have that CFO teach or explain how they look at deals from their end, which goes back to the justifying why it matters with an ROI or any other type of an outcome that's quantitatively measured. Because if sellers were to see what actually goes on behind the scenes in the eyes of the CFO, that would probably be hugely, hugely valuable.
Yeah, I learned that a little over 15 years ago in one of my very early sales trainings, and I talk about it a little bit on LinkedIn, but not a ton. That's one of the things that has been like the most impactful for me is learning how finance and CFOs think, and again financially engineering deals. Because once you know those levers, and once you know what they care about and what they want to see and what they want to hear, and you just design and build how you go to market around that, you're ultimately building the thing that will eventually get you the deal a month or two from now once you've run your sales process, because the seller will need to articulate that and the internal buying team will need to articulate that. And the more you can build around them being ready for that, the more likely you are to win.
For sure. So in terms of what's screwed up in the world of startups these days, you don't have enough fingers on both hands to identify them. But what do you think are the top couple that you see over and over again? Like what's fucked up?
Yeah. I mean, if you think about CRO tenure right now, I think it's a year. I think it was 1.3, 1.4 years, and now it's down to a year. It may even be sub a year. That's fucked up. The fact that you're literally turning over your most senior person in sales before they've even been able to have the impact you hired them to have. That is messed up. What most founders think is you hire a sales leader, they're magic. They've got this Rolodex of all the great salespeople, and they'll just hire them all, and those people know how to sell your thing day one, and revenue will just start coming in. And they don't realize that sales is a game of timing and opportunity, and good execution and foundational elements. And they don't realize all the components and all the things that go into orchestrating a sales environment. And they also don't realize that in order for that to be successful, you need marketing to be doing their job and product to be doing their job and customer success under that doing their job. Because if those things aren't working, then all new revenue doesn't matter. So it's really interesting. And so I think the truly not giving the people you hire the appropriate amount of time to execute, which is often like 2 to 3 years versus 1. Because it's amazing when you hire that first one and then you fire them in a year, and then you hire another one and the other one is somehow more successful than the first one. It's like maybe there's a curve to success. Maybe there's foundational things that just don't equal to you revenue yet that person inherits. So there's some of that. There's also the ensuring right product. But there's also the hiring at appropriate speeds. I think that's one of the other major areas that I see where they hire that chief revenue officer and they're like, cool, I want you to hire 3 people or 5 people or build a team. And you haven't really even proven that the model can work at all. So to me, I don't even hire a CRO yet. I recommend you hiring fractional at best. I recommend you hiring one really good salesperson. And if that one really good salesperson can figure it out, then I recommend you hiring a second. And if they can figure it out, you can now start documenting some stuff. And if that works, cool. Now you can maybe think about hiring fractionally or a full-time, revenue leader that can then take the things that are working and fine-tune them and then hire and build and scale. To me, that the purpose of the CRO should be scaling things that are working and then fixing things that they see are broken. It's not necessarily building the whole thing from scratch, because you do that, you're going to really increase your burn rate a lot, plus all the people they're going to have to hire and all the tools they're going to have to implement. And all of that is unknown and unproven. So it's like, how would you start a little smaller and prove some of these core foundational things before you pour gas on it? Because that's the part that I think fucks up companies and leads to so much of the turnover I've seen, is just doing those things in the wrong order and trying to move too fast.
I will agree with that. And I'll even add, I think that companies, when they say, yeah, we're looking for a CRO, and I read these job descriptions, they all say the same exact thing. What many of them are really asking for is just a head of sales. And a head of sales is a completely different role than a CRO. How would you describe or define the role of a CRO?
CRO owns marketing. They own sales. They also own success. To me, they own those 3 pillars. And they're not necessarily the person that is in the trenches doing the work of all 3 pillars. They are the folks that own the unified strategy and put the right people in the right places to be successful. So, that's how I look at it. Like, I'm a CRO in my role. I've got a marketing team that's outsourced that reports to me. I've got partnerships, success, and sales that report to me. And do I join sales calls? Yeah, I do from time to time. Am I doing any of the outbound to set meetings for very certain key accounts? I will. But I see my main role as building the strategy and then putting the right people in the right places to execute it. And that is what I think is the role of the CRO. The head of sales does some of that, but they often aren't touching marketing. And they're normally in some way told by a CRO or CEO, the strategy, and then the head of sales needs to go execute it. They're not often the one that owns the strategy. And I think that's the other piece that's different, is there is a difference between executing something and truly developing it and owning it from a thought perspective.
So essentially it's a leadership position, 100%, overseeing key captains who are responsible for their own individual department. And your job is to make sure those departments, all part of the go-to-market operation, as I like to say, are all not individual, but working together.
Yep.
That said, you've got other C-suite execs like product, engineering, operations, finance. How do you include them in your practice?
Yeah. So for me, we're all on the revenue team. We have standing leadership meetings. In that meeting, they have things that they own and they report to me around, not report, but share with me what's happening in the business and support me. And then same thing with me is I've got the things that I share with them. And then when I have ideas or things that make sense, we're collaborating, on those, together. Like, we're a small team, but like my CFO is a very sales friendly CFO. And, he's also very operationally gifted. So there are things where I'll go to him and be like, look, I'm thinking about this. How would you suggest we make this work? And like, how do you think this is then from a revenue and, money that we've coming in? How do you think we budget for this and handle it? And we'll talk about the operations and the finance and the cost and also, what the outcome is going to be from a revenue perspective, and then we'll work together to build that strategy. So, I like to see it as something that, I'm not on an island. I'm working very much with my, other executive partners on, the execution of the things.
David, tell me your thoughts on this metaphor, this analogy. I liken a tech startup business, a SaaS business, which is where I generally live. I liken it to a restaurant. So growing up, I've worked in restaurants for years. You got the kitchen where the dev and the product team sit, and they determine what is it that we're cooking? What do we make? What's our menu going to look like? They make sure we have all the ingredients. They make sure it can scale. They make sure that the food's not getting anybody sick, so to speak. And then you get the dining room. That's the go-to-market organization. You got sales, marketing, and anyone who helps the diners have a good experience. You want to make sure there's a line at the door. You want to make sure the place looks awesome. It smells delicious. And the kitchen can't do it without the dining room, and the dining room can't do it without the kitchen.
Absolutely. And both need to be communicating and getting feedback from each other.
100%. Yeah. So the chef, when you go to a good restaurant, here's one of the problems that I see. This is where a company gets fucked up very quickly. They get so excited that somebody came in and sat down at the table that the sales rep or the wait person doesn't necessarily know what the kitchen can and can't do. So someone comes in for, bowl of pasta, and they say, I want a bowl of pasta. And the sales rep says, okay, goes into the kitchen, says, table 3, they want a bowl of pasta. And the kitchen looks at them and says, we're Chinese food. We don't have pasta. We have rice, but we don't have pasta.
Right.
And then
that's ramen noodles.
But they're willing to give me a shit ton of money.
Right.
They're willing to give me a ton of money. And then the CEO jumps in. He's like, well, we got a customer. Let's go figure it out. So the whole kitchen goes to handle table 3. Guess what? Table 4 comes in.
Right.
And table 4 wants something else. Everybody rallies around table 4. The kitchen's in chaos. And before you know it, you got 5 tables in the dining room, and it's a complete mess because there's no productization. There's no consistency. Reps don't know what they can and can't sell. I see this all the time. It, to me, is it's the result of a lot of disorganization across the board. And it's up for the C-suite, especially the go-to-market leader, to make sure that it's all sound and it's all working properly.
Yep.
Have you experienced this? You got any thoughts? Can you add anything to it? I love this analogy, and my sales reps make fun of me all the time because I use it over and over again. Well,
and it's so this doesn't just happen in small companies. Like even when I was at ADP, this stuff would happen. It's the job of the frontline person to communicate what they're hearing in the field. It's the job of leadership to listen and explain to sellers why we can or can't do certain things. But it's then also the job of leadership that if every single person that's coming into that restaurant is asking for pasta and you're a Chinese food place, well, maybe we're advertising that we're a pasta place and didn't know it.
Wouldn't be the first time I saw that happen.
So, maybe we should become an Italian food place. So there's a time where, and that's part of the job is like, there are points where you need to take all that information in and tell sellers to go away and stop and to go sell what we can sell because it's the purpose, and to work with the right types of people. And there are also times where you need to look at trends and go back to product and say, hey, we've seen this come up too often. We need to think about that. We need to figure that out, because if everybody's asking for that and we can't deliver that, we may need to think about delivering that. So to me, it's the job of again, that CRO that does work cross-functionally across these different departments, that has the ability, and I think this comes with skill, to be close enough to the market and close enough to operations to understand both sides and then give the right direction.
Do you think the chef should come out of the kitchen and commit to the dining room? And do you ever bring your CTO out on sales calls with you?
We're a service-based company. So in the organization I'm with right now, no. In other companies in the past, have I brought technology or product folks to the conversation to hear directly from the client? Yeah, I have. Especially if I see a good sound quality ask coming from the client that I've probably heard a few times before, and I want to make the point, I will absolutely do that. Because I'm not saying that operations and product don't trust sales, but we've trained them not to trust us because we've asked for lots of things over the years across all different companies and said that if they build these things, we'll make all this money. And they've then rerouted roadmaps and projects and resource allocation and hired and done all these things. And the money didn't always follow. So I'm speaking in very broad terms for a lot of my peers over the years, but we've done that. And so we've burned some of that into them. So, there are times where we need to step out of that equation and bring those people in to hear directly from product or from the customer. And what I've found is when that happens, product, technology, operations, what have you, often will start, being a little closer and being more flexible with us because now they've heard it from the customer versus, me. But so yeah, where it makes sense, I will do that. And we're our own worst enemies when it comes to these things.
I think a big part of success aligning the kitchen and the dining room is to force the kitchen to create very clear and specific instruction as to what they can and can't do and what substitutions, so to speak, sticking with this analogy of a restaurant, are acceptable and what are not. Because when you're in the dining room, I've seen sales reps say, yeah, well, that blue thing that we have, they just want it to be green. So that's easy, right? Blue to green, you just flick a switch, right? Not necessarily. Because when you go into the kitchen with an order and you say, I sold them green, the kitchen's going to say, are you kidding me? That means we have to take the whole thing apart and put it all back together again in green. It's not as easy as you thought. And now you got a customer whose expectations weren't set properly.
You're spot on. And the key to that, though, is where you go back to communication here. It's not just where I see product and tech and ops also failing with sales is they say, we can't do it, so go away. And sales is just thinking to themselves, why? Well, we can't, go away. So it's not just what we can and can't do, but why? Because is it a resource issue? Is it a prioritization issue? Is it a money issue? What's the issue behind the reason it can't be done? Because then we can properly articulate that to the customer. And I've actually found times where I've been told, no, we can't do that. And I've pushed back on product and tech and said, why? And had them explain to me why. And the reason is because it costs money and it takes time. And I was able to isolate how much money and how much time. And then I was able to go back to the client and say, we can't do that unless you give me this amount of money and wait this amount of time. And had people say, okay. So then I can go back to tech and I can say, they're willing to give me this amount of money in this amount of time. And then them say, oh, that's great. So, we need to not only be communicating what we can and can't do, but also the depth behind the reasoning. So sales can then, properly do their job.
Yeah, I think the why is critically important. And what you find, because I've done this, it's a big part of my sales effort. When you explain why something can or can't be done, it's really amazing to see how reasonable people are when they say, oh, all right, now that you've explained it, that makes sense. I get it. And so I can accept the answer no. But the answer doesn't always have to be no, to your point. I had this boss years ago who used to say, does the customer want a mop or do they want to buy clean floors? Find out what the customer is really after, because the customer will call you up and say, yeah, I want a mop. And you'll say, all right, a mop, why? Well, because my kitchen floor is a mess and I want it clean. Well, what if I could sell you a Roomba? It's a lot more money, but you wouldn't have to touch it. You just set it and forget it, and you come home from work and your floors are sparkling. Well, I never thought about that. So sometimes the customer doesn't know what they want. They just know sometimes a customer doesn't know what product they want, but they know what they ultimately want, which is the outcome. Back to the beginning of the conversation. David, it's been awesome having you on this really, really informative and interesting and fun conversation today. I would love to ask, how can people follow you and how can they get involved in your world?
Yeah, man. No, Dan, thanks for having me on. This was a lot of fun. LinkedIn is probably like the easiest way. I post every single day. So, David Weiss at the Sales Collective on LinkedIn. Drop me a note there. I respond to the vast majority of them as long as you aren't, spamming me some nonsense and trying to sell me the second you connect with me. So, appreciate you having me on. And anyone that I can help or wants to reach out, feel free to.
Sounds great. Awesome. Thank you so much, David.
Thanks, Dan.